It's Final Word Cricket Podcast. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon. And our guest this week is Australian batsman, Victorian captain, Leicestershire batsman, wicketkeeper. So you had the gloves the other week, Pete Handscomb. We're at Grace Road. I think it's the biggest playing surface in the world behind you here. Lovely spot to be doing it in the studio. Welcome to the show. Thanks for making time for us. And how have you found your return to Leicestershire? I know you played cricket here as a youngster on the way up the pyramid, if you like. How have you found the first month here?
Oh, pleasure to be on with you guys to start with. But no, it's nice being back. I was lucky enough when I came over here to play some club cricket that we had a connection, obviously, with Andrew McDonald being at Leicester, that I was able to come down and do a little bit of training with the boys, and then with the fact that I've got a British passport, made it a nice little chance to play some twos cricket here for Leicester as the overseas, and sort of get that taste for what it is like over here. So that was a nice experience.
And I guess the difference in playing for a club like Leicestershire compared to some of your previous England stints, Middlesex at Lords, Yorkshire at Headingley, Test playing grounds. I know you've got the other experience at Gloucestershire as well over at Bristol, but a club without quite the same resources in, I suppose it's an unfashionable county. I hate that term, but that's how it's characterised. The difference in experience playing here with a different kind of group as well.
Yeah, it is different to Test playing venues, but it also has its own charm and its own characteristics as well. And I think one of the beauties about Grace Road, which I'm finding out each day and in each training session, is that the facilities here are actually really, really, really good. The nets are great. The centre wicket's been brilliant, and we've been able to get out onto the ground and have centre wicket practice, which is huge. So you get a good feeling for the ground. You get to face, bowlers coming up the hill. You get to face bowlers coming down the hill. Get an understanding of sort of what that means for your game. So it is nice in that retrospect that we have a lot of control over this ground and can sort of really get a good feel for it and make it a good home venue.
You must have been over the moon with the way things started, Pete. You've had some tough seasons in county cricket previously, but landing this time a big 100, match-winning 50. Leicestershire's had this winless drought. You're able to get them a big win against Yorkshire. It couldn't have started any better.
It was a nice start, yeah. It's you always want to come in and help a team or contribute to a win as quickly as possible, and the best way to do that is making runs. But yeah, to be able to do that in the sort of first game against such a big club, and then all the sort of records that come from Leicester, out of the woodwork. They hadn't beaten Yorkshire at Headingley since 1910. Didn't win a game last year, so yes, it was a really, really nice feeling amongst the group, coming in and hitting the ground running like that. And it wasn't just me that was making runs and helping to contribute to a win. It was a whole team effort, which I think is probably the most pleasing thing about that first game against Yorkshire, is that so many people contributed to getting that win, and it's a good sign for the season.
It felt like a big decision for you to come out here and play county cricket as opposed to going out to New Zealand and playing in the A-team recently, and acknowledging you've had several seasons in England and the most recent stint at Lords didn't go as well as you would have liked. Was there any logic to that decision that you wanted to kind of prove yourself in these conditions, specifically in England, rather than going on your umpteenth A-tour?
Yeah, and I think the A-tour had been sort of programmed to try and emulate English conditions as much as possible. So playing in New Zealand, but with Duke balls, and they were trying to get as close to English wickets as they could over there. So if we were trying to emulate English conditions, then what better than to actually come over here and play in the conditions. And also it was more opportunity as well. There's 2 games playing for Australia A and 6 games here playing for Leicester. So that opportunity to play more cricket, to be able to push my case even further and and then also just work on my game over here and keep trying to get better.
And did the Australian selectors, did you have any conversation with them about that? Was there any acknowledgement about the sense in making that decision and deciding not to go to New Zealand? And I suppose being in England, being around means that you're available as a reserve, even if you're not in the squad. You put yourself closer to the action in that way.
Yeah. I think as soon as I found out that the Leicester opportunity was on the table, I spoke to the selectors straight away, and got a feeling from them how they would want me to go, what direction would be better, and to their credit, they said straight away, no issues, like go and play in England, get more games, get more experience over there, which was great from them. To wait county cricket ahead of an Australia A tour was great from them, and I'm grateful that I got this opportunity. And then it's also part being in England, Ashes year. Everyone wants to be here, and if you're in the right spot at the right time, then you never know what's going to happen.
You've had such an unusual last 6 years in many ways from an Australian perspective, and we'll get into a bit of that and go back to the start of your story. But I remember the last time I interviewed you was for a newspaper piece at the start of the first lockdown, I guess it would have been during the pandemic, and your perspective at the time was that you'd been non-stop on the treadmill playing cricket in England and Australia for pretty much a decade by that point, and you didn't say explicitly that you'd burnt out, but I got the impression you might have a little bit, and were grateful for a bit of time away from the game. Has that given you perspective as well, coming back to playing for Australia in recent months, playing county cricket over here, that you've had a chance to refresh the batteries a little bit, albeit a little while ago, and now you're pretty happy to be back on the treadmill again?
Yeah, it's funny. Perspective's such an interesting one with cricket and how it does change. I'd had quite a few back-to-back seasons, and there was a lot of ups and downs in that sort of 4-year block leading into COVID and into the lockdown, where I was probably mentally drained, feeling the effects of being dropped, being selected, being dropped again, and that rollercoaster journey that is cricket and international cricket. So looking back, it was a good time for me to have a break. Obviously it was a tough time around the world, and it was pretty scary as well. But I got to spend some time at home, which doesn't happen often, or extended periods at home. We were very lucky that we could still train, so I was still able to still work on my craft and stay fit and do everything I needed to do, that when the matches did come, that I was ready to go again. The body was ready, but also I'd had that mental break. It was sort of a bit of a blessing in disguise.
And I guess being a few years further on, you're into the early part of your 30s now, and getting back into that Australian team, were you able to be philosophical about it, to embrace the experience for what it was, and be a little bit more detached from, having to think about what this means next, what the next thing might be, but just to be able to enjoy the experience in India?
Yes. Yeah. Sort of what we were talking about there. Perspective changed a little bit, and it's also changed with the birth of my first boy. So you put all that together. You put the hard times playing international cricket, getting dropped, getting selected, getting dropped, and then a global pandemic, and then you start building a family. I think cricket slowly or quickly, depending how you look at it, starts going down the rung in what's important in your life, and you start seeing that we're very lucky to play cricket. We're very lucky to be able to travel the world and do all that. But the important things are my family and spending quality time with them and making sure that they're going well. So the stresses that I used to have about cricket have changed, and yes, there are definitely new stresses now, and that pulls in a different direction. But yeah, when you're out on the cricket field, it's nice. It's you're enjoying your mate's company. You're still trying to do everything that you possibly can to win and to contribute to wins with whoever team you're playing with at the time. But yeah, that perceived pressure, I think, has changed quite a bit.
You hear this a lot from the guys in the Aussie dressing room at the moment. I think Marnus, who you're playing against tomorrow here, as it happens, Marnus Labuschagne here with Glamorgan, he reflected on it during the Aussie summer that his mannerisms were different last summer because he's just too knackered at home with the baby. And I know that myself as well, it's a very relatable experience when you've got young kids that you can't have quite the same laser-like focus on one thing because you'd be doing a disservice to people around you. Usman Khawaja is the other great example, really, that he came back to the Test team at 36, so many years on in the career from where you are at the moment, and says that he's never been more carefree playing, and it can't be coincidental that he's achieved his best results at this stretch of time. So, I mean, do you take inspiration from colleagues of yours, teammates of yours who've been on this journey that you're now on as a dad, and wonder whether that might be how your career flows as well? Now you're kind of on the back nine of it at age 31.
32 today.
32 today.
Yeah, I know.
That is sloppy research.
Yeah, come on, mate. I thought you'd be all
sloppy
over that.
research. Happy birthday. Usually that's the sort of thing we pick up on. Happy bloody hell.
I thought there was going to be cakes and candles. And,
we can deal with this later on. 32 today, then all the more reason to, I suppose, do a moment of reflection as we are, I guess.
Yeah.
But, that idea that, 32,
yeah.
that you're closer to the end than the start, and how that might feel in this different stage of life.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you sort of hit the nail on the head there with Marnus and Uzi, and how Marnus's mannerisms change because home life is different, and there are those different stresses. But I think that's an incredible thing. So no matter what's happened on the cricket field during the day or training, you've gone in, you've forgotten which end to hold the bat, you can't seem to hit the ball for whatever reason, and you're driving home and you're miserable, and you're like, oh, this sucks. I don't know how I'm going to score my next run. And then you walk through the door and you stop thinking about cricket straight away because you've got a baby to feed, nappies to change, toys to play with, and all of a sudden that stress that was cricket just disappears by a better stress, which is exciting. And I think it's a really it's a nice thing to have, to be able to go home and not think about work as much. And if you do come home and you haven't got anything else, like I used to spend hours after coming home thinking like, what am I doing? Where's my back going? Where are my feet going? What's my hands doing? And this sort of like just spirals, and you end up into some dark places. But you don't have that. You don't have that time now. You don't have that luxury because you got a little person depending on you to be entertained, to be cleaned and bathed, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting switching off the worry machine that can just make you go around and around. I guess if we go back to the start, you mentioned the UK passport, your dad John and his strong connection to Huntington Cricket Club, and then eventually moving out to Australia. Like, was it inevitable that you would end up being immersed in cricket, given that?
Cricket always ran in the family, and so Dad played minor county stuff over here, I think, along with his brother, my uncle. So they loved it, and then the culture in Australia once you're out there is get outdoors, and during the summertime it's backyard cricket or beach cricket, or you're going down to the nets and having a hit. So yeah, I think cricket was always going to be a part of my life. I was always going to be immersed into it, in some way or another. I'm just lucky that I was able to continue on and play at a high standard and make a living out of it for the moment. My my stepbrother James was a very good leg spinner as well, and he pushed his case to play a couple of second 11 games, I think, for Victoria, or he was close, but it didn't work out for him. So sometimes these happen, and I think you got to be grateful that I was in the right place at the right time and sort of making the right runs to be able to make a career out of this.
I know your dad's come up on the podcast before when we had Mel Jones on for I guess it was our Christmas ep 4 or 5 years ago, and she spoke lovingly about the influence he had on her life as a student. You must get a bit of that from his former students and pupils who he influenced in loving cricket, obviously like your family did as well.
Yeah, I've had the odd message, randomly on Instagram, just, sort of how good Dad was, I think, for those that went through Elwood Secondary College in Melbourne. But yeah, Mel Jones being one of them, and he was the geography teacher / sports coordinator, and would drive the bus and take him out to games. So he was an incredible man, and had a lot of time for everyone, and especially me, with the amount of times he took me down to the nets, threw countless balls, helped me play straight, play in the V, keep the ball on the ground, all that stuff. That sticks with you forever. So yeah, I was very lucky with him.
He was a fair bit older in life when he had you, and passed away just before you started your international career, but at a very very old age, or relatively old age. Yep. I mean, do you sort of think now? Do you think about him and when you're playing for Australia or playing for Victoria, and think, gee, it would have been pretty cool given his love of cricket to have seen you wear the baggy green and that kind of thing, or is it the sort of thing you can compartmentalize, given it was a while ago now?
No, it's still think about him a fair bit. I pretty much made my international debut a year after he passed. He did make it to 80, so it was actually a decent stint from him as well. So he was good, but yeah, still think about him a lot. I think that's something that it's a shame that he never got to see sort of the international side of it, and how sort of my career has progressed since then. But it's nice to think back and see how much, or remember how much he did do for me, and hopefully that's something I can do with Jack.
At the point where you're growing up with a dad who's mad into cricket, it's a big part of your life, that's just normal, that's just part of the background at that point. At what stage did you realise you might actually make a go of this as a profession?
I don't think I really ever thought that this would be a profession. I sort of had odd jobs here and there, as I was a soccer referee from 14 to 18, and getting abused on the sidelines every Saturday, and then on top of that, I was doing a bit of tennis coaching as well at a place where I used to train for tennis. So I was at uni. I was getting ready to live a relatively normal life and play cricket on the weekends and enjoy that. And then when I was 19, I had a really good season for St Kilda. It was a decent season in compared to others. It was a low scoring season. I think it was quite wet, and the wickets were a bit tough. And I was able to be one of the top scorers, and lucky enough that I got a rookie contract off the back of that. But even then, you don't really know how it's going to go and what that looks like. And rookie contracts aren't a lot of money, or they weren't when I started, and they definitely weren't, when the boys before me were starting as well. So that's all changed, which is great to see the way the game of cricket is going. But in terms of being professional, it was probably something when I was maybe in my 4th or 5th year where I was like, all right, this could be a decade long thing. If I'm lucky, it could be 15 years. I've really got to try and keep doing this. Interesting.
A lot of people that come through the pathway as you did, Vic 17s, 19s, Australia 19s, they think they're going to be, professionals for 20 years, right? They hedge that way They withdraw from formal education. They don't have other options, if you like, where you kind of were the other way, which might have meant you were fairly temperamentally well set to be a professional. And I mean, Chris Rogers, your Victorian coach, tells an anecdote which I'm sure I've relayed back to you before in questioning, where he remembers your first Sheffield Shield game at the Gabba, searing hot heat. You're at the tea break, and instead of having an energy drink and a banana, you sat on the physiotherapist bench and meditated for 20 minutes. And he thought, as a senior player in the team then with you, he saw that as an early cue that you had your act together, and you understood that having a good sense of control over your thought processes and so on, and staying calm and riding the roller coaster of cricket that way was going to put you in a good position. So it suggests that you, from an early age, had a pretty good handle on where you were at.
Well, yeah, I was lucky. It depends how you look at it. I was never really that good in the state stuff. I did okay. Probably my under-17s year was good for Victoria, and I sort of got a little bit off the back of that. But then my under-19s year, I averaged 10 for Victoria and couldn't spell bat. So you go through that and you're thinking, well, all right, this probably isn't for me. It was a great crack. I've enjoyed it, but I need to make sure that something else is going to happen. And Dad was being a teacher. And Mum was always strong on education. It was, make sure that uni's there and you've got something in the background, because professional sport is great, and you're very lucky if you get to play it, but not many people do. So I always had little things going off, or growing up, little ways to make money, and that's probably helped me a fair bit.
And that anecdote about you sort of having that mindfulness process and meditative process and all the rest of it, when you're a pretty young bloke, it tends to take people a bit deeper into their 20s or 30s before they find that kind of thing. What is that still part of your life now as a battle-hardened pro?
Yeah. I still use it, and it took quite a long time to sort of figure out why the meditation was good for me, and sort of how it helped. At the time, it was something that Greg Shippard had got all the rookies doing. He'd just taken us to it wasn't a mindfulness coach at the time. It was just a way to meditate. And we learnt a one-word saying that we would just, a mantra that we would just repeat for 20 minutes. And we sort of learned how to go into that space and what that meant for our mind, and I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed that I could stop for 20 minutes and feel really relaxed after that. Essentially, it's not a 20-minute nap, but it's just like a shutdown, which kind of revitalized myself and sort of felt like I'd been asleep for 2 hours. And you come back with a bit of energy, and I enjoyed that feeling, so I lent into it more and tried to research it more, and then sort of found out that I get really nervous before I bat. No matter who I'm playing for, I get really, really nervous, and my natural nervous response is to be really tired. So I start yawning, and I feel like I need to fall asleep.
Well, it looks like it in India, didn't it? When the camera pans to you on the balcony, but when you were next in India, I don't know if you even know this, it looks like you were napping.
Yes,
so that still happens now.
Yeah, so that's sort of two wickets out. If I'm feeling that tiredness, that effect again, then rather than trying to go the other way and grab a coffee and wake myself up, I actually lean into it and I fall asleep. Or I have this mantra and I try and calm myself down that way, and then once the wicket falls and I'm kind of next in, then everything starts to come together again, and I can be ready to bat.
Was there a buzz? Like, was it enjoyable going up those levels as a younger player, getting into state cricket and so on, or was it more an anxious kind of experience? It sounds like there's quite a lot of anxiety there and worrying about whether you're good enough to do it and that sort of thing.
It's an interesting one, because I think when you're young and you first come in, the expectations are low, and it's just like, go and play, mate. Like, excuse me, you've done enough to warrant selection. Like, just keep keep doing that and see how you go. You basically got a free hit at it. And I made my debut for Victoria in my rookie year, the first couple of games for the season, and sort of did okay. And yeah, there was again still no expectation. It was help out the team, do what you got to do when you're batting, back your instincts, back your game plan, and sort of go from there. And only once you start making runs and sort of becoming a first picked in the team, then sort of that anxiety started to come into it, and being like, okay, that perceived pressure that I have to perform day in, day out, sort of that started to creep in, and then again it intensifies even more when you start playing for Australia and there's more cameras and they're picking you apart even more, and then you go through that stage where you make no runs and you can't find a way out, and you don't know what you're doing, and you're overanalyzed, and that anxiety creeps in again. So it is those waves, but yeah, it's just over the period of time. And I think you'll talk to guys like Marnus and Uzi and even Matthew Wade who sort of come back at that later stage in their career, that you just learn how to deal with that stuff, and you understand what it is and what that feeling is, and how to get through it. But in the time when you're experiencing it first, it's scary. When
you're in the headlights as well, like it tends to be a tipping point for every athlete that does well, where suddenly everybody knows your name. And for you, that moment is kind of on television, that Big Bash game. And I remember where no one makes runs, you make 100, and suddenly you're front and centre and being talked about for Australian selection. Doesn't happen then, but nevertheless, you are a name that people know. In the street, people would probably be getting a cup of coffee and go, "Oh, that's that Pete Handscomb I saw him make 100 the other night." Like that feeling of not having your anonymity anymore. Like, that feeds into what you're describing there.
Yeah, and then also the fact that it is your job, and you are going to work each time you play. And the fact that people could just comment on randomly, absolute randoms can just comment on how you've done your job that day.
Yes.
And whether you've had a good day or a bad day. But yeah, you might get just some random message on Instagram just confirming your negative thoughts, and you're like, "Oh, come on, mate! I didn't really need that today. Like I was feeling down enough as it was." So yeah, it's weird. But it's funny what people remember and what people forget. Like I made 100 in that Big Bash game against Perth Scorchers. It sort of helped us get into the semi-finals. Then the next week played the Perth Scorchers again over in the Wacker and got a second ball duck. And that was my expectation, was that next week I'm going to make another 100. But cricket, being the great leveler, just pulled me straight back down to earth, and I was walking off the field pretty quickly.
It's an interesting one, that innings, because I've watched a lot of Big Bash cricket, and to be honest, I remember very little of it. It all just blurs into each other. It's all basically one long game. But I remember that innings. I'm like, why do I remember that? I remember it very vividly. I remember watching it. Do you have any sense, when you were playing it or afterwards, because it seems to be one that people know about? You say, remember the Handscomb 100? And they're like, oh, yeah, that one. Can you shed any light on why that might have cut through in a way that it did?
No, I don't know. Maybe because it was so unexpected, and I was just this little weedy kind of bloke who can't hit sixes, and all of a sudden managed to put a couple over the fence, and but everything went right that game. Blokes up the other end were able to take the pressure off me when I needed it. Like John Hastings comes in, hits 3 sixes back to back, gets out trying to hit the fourth. Rob Quiney played a lovely innings. Clint Mackay played a very good innings as well to get us close. And then Scotty Boland at the end, almost running himself out just to get me back on strike. It was just it's just a really weird sort of innings, how everything seemed to work and balls fell in the gap. And Yeah, but I don't know why it sticks in people's mind. I'm sorry that it's sticking in your minds. I'm sure you've got better things to think about.
It's such a funny sort of game of snakes and ladders, especially with selection before you've had a chance to play for Australia, right? Everyone's got an opinion what you're describing there, and there are these windows or opportunities where it's pretty clear that one innings can get you a baggy green. And you had one of those moments against New South Wales in late 2016. The Australian team have a stinker in Hobart. There are going to be wholesale changes. We described it on the podcast as the Australia's Got Talent Sheffield Shield round, and you go out and make a double, and it's pretty clear you're going to get picked, unless something goes radically awry. Your reflections on being in that spot where you know that you're this far away and one more hit and you can reach the pinnacle of any professional cricketer's desire, which is to earn a baggy green in Australia.
Yeah, it was such an interesting time. I'd like to think that no matter sort of what I'd done in that game, I still would have been selected because I'd put in a lot of good work up to that time as well. And I think if you're selecting off one game, guys can have a day out, and lucky for me, I did. But there was a lot of good players that didn't make runs that game that could have easily been picked and performed for Australia as well.
I think it's just reflective of the madness of the time, right? Like it's less to do with what you're saying there about the body of work. Clearly, it had a couple of really very tidy Shield seasons. It was more that it was an altered state of consciousness for Australian cricket right then, and it was like whoever made runs right then was probably going to get a start, and then you walk along, and it was the most obvious thing in the world.
Yeah, and then so I guess while I was batting or coming into that game, it was more, let's not focus on the Australian stuff like that. That'll come if I do my processes right. If I do everything I can to contribute to a win for Victoria. Trav Dean made 130 up the other end as well. No one spoke about him, but he batted beautifully against the exact same attack. Exact same team, same conditions. He made great runs. So there's timing, there's luck. But in terms of that game, it was trying to take the focus away from the Australia stuff. Let's just focus on the next ball that's coming down. I know it's a cliche, but that is cricket. As soon as you're thinking too far in front, you're forgetting to react to just that ball that's coming down.
And it's a dream run to start with. Like, it's tough, and you prosper. You're debuting against Rabada and Abbott under lights, that Adelaide pink ball test where things are difficult. A couple of hundreds against Pakistan in 3 test matches to follow that. I mean, it just must have felt like you were flying at that point. You've made it, you've got in, and then everything is going exactly right.
Yeah, and this is where cricket I think is so crazy, because one, I was really lucky to be picked while I was in form. I'd played club cricket a week before that, made 100. I'd then come into the Shield cricket, made a double 100. So I'd gone back-to-back runs, and I was like, "Yep, you're in, you're picked. Like, go for it, just own your game." I'm like, "Sweet, I know what my game is, so this is what we're going to do." Whereas I think sometimes you can get picked and you don't say no, but you're almost thinking, "Oh no, should I actually be in this situation?" So I was quite lucky that I felt like I was ready to give it a crack. And then again, in the actual game, I play and miss my first ball, which could have easily been nicked off for a golden duck. My next ball, I drive quite well, but it lands, half a foot short of Philander for a return, caught and bowled. Either one of those goes wrong, and I'm walking off the field for a duck on test debut, and all of a sudden, my confidence levels go from sky high, I'm ready to play, to I'm not good enough for this level, and then you don't know what happens in the tests after that. So
and Nick
everything
Maddinson
just
didn't he in the same game? He had that happen to him, didn't it? From memory.
Exactly. So I came in at a time during the day, sun out, ball not doing, doing a little bit, but not doing massive. Didn't actually have to face Rabada in my first innings. You know, everything just worked out nicely for me to be able to build an innings and sort of get some confidence in Test cricket. And then Nick Maddinson comes out, faces Rabada under lights, gets an absolute seed, and walks off with a completely different feeling. And it's you don't sort of see it at the time, but sort of looking back on it, you know, it could have been so different, considering that how cricket is such a mental game and such a confidence game, that I walked out of that game with confidence, and you know, potentially Maddo might have been doubting because he only got the one hit, so it might have been doubting, you know, how he was going to go about it.
It's a remarkable first year in international cricket for you, because, you know, you hit the winning runs in your first test, make a half century, 50 on Boxing Day, you know, a couple of hundreds that Jeff referred to before. You finished the summer with an average of like 99.7 or something ridiculous. Haven't been dismissed for under 50 in Test cricket. Then you're off to Asia. Have a Test match that you save against Ashwin and Jadeja on day 5 in a dust bowl by that point at Ranchi, making 70 odd not. You know, the Chittagong match winning 80 odd when you lose 10 kilograms or whatever it was. Can't remember now, but you know, you were in serious distress and get to the other side of it. I reckon then, after Chittagong, the consensus around the press box and around wider Australian cricket is Peter Handscomb's the next Test captain. Right? It's just like, had you asked 100 people, 90 of them would have said, Handscomb's the next Test captain. 2 tests later, you're out of the side. And this is just, in hindsight, one of the more staggering turns, because yeah, you miss out in Brisbane, but you don't completely miss out in Adelaide. You make 30 odd or 40 odd in the first innings and bat for a long time, bat in the dark against the second new ball on that first night. Miss out in the second test, but there was so much scrutiny on your technique. No one gave a shit when you were making runs about the way you set up and that unusual tap of the bat and back and across and all that. No one seemed to care in 16-17, but a couple of Ashes test matches that don't blow the doors down, and you're not only sort of in the gun, you're dropped. There's no sort of third chance or anything like that. You're gone, and the bloke who replaces you rattles off a ton at the first time of asking in Mitch Marsh. I mean, give us a sense of how you were able to ride that particular roller coaster, because it seemed like a pretty extreme one.
Yeah, that rattled me. That was tough. That was a really that was one of the lower points in my cricketing career. I'd come in, I was still feeling all right. I think I'd made 100 in Shield cricket as well before that, before the Ashes. I got 1 hit in Brisbane. I went at a runner ball. I got 13 maybe, but at a runner ball and felt good, played a couple of nice shots and then just missed one, which, you know, you do sometimes as a batter. And for me, my mode of dismissal tends to be LBW, just based on how I bat and where I stand. So sometimes it looks ugly, but it allows me to score runs in other places. And then the next game was tough, batted under lights. So this is like the flip side from the previous year. So I had the good run the previous year, and then this year, had the tough conditions under lights. You know, fight my ass off trying to get through, and I got through both times batting under lights, and then got out the next morning and sort of missed out on those opportunities. And that's the moment there where I could have cemented a spot for the summer and had a chance, and I didn't. And that's a bit on me. That's a bit on the English bowlers as well, and how well they were bowling at the time and making it talk. At least to me, they were. But yeah, that Perth game, that was tough. I had a feeling I was going to get dropped, even after just three innings in Australia, a place where I'd made a lot of runs before. I was hopeful to stay in, but the wicket dictated that we sort of needed the extra bowler, and I understood that. Probably the worst thing about it was that I was warming up the morning of the game. Morning of day 1, I was in the nets. I was starting to do my routine, you know, just in case, because I hadn't been told anything yet. And then selector comes over and goes, "Yeah, Pete, you're not playing this game."
That seems like dreadful man management. I mean, you're still a relatively junior member of the side despite your output to that stage, and you're told the morning of the test, "Sorry, we've gone the other way." Like, surely there should be a better line of communication. You'd hope there would be now.
Yeah, well, it's tough. It is tough because looking from, I mean, I didn't see it at the time. I didn't see it from their point of view at the time, because obviously I was in my own bubble and I'm frustrated. I'm like, nah, I should be playing. I want to be playing, rah, rah. But also they wanted to see the wicket again in the morning. They wanted to understand what the conditions were going to be like, have a better understanding of, what the weather was going to do, if they needed the extra bowler or not. So I understand that, yeah, they waited that extra time. But yeah, in the moment, it hurt a lot. And then to couple that with all the scrutiny that you get as a international player, with all those extra cameras, and the commentators need to talk about something. So if you're a little bit different, then you're going to get spoken about sometimes. So it was a big learning experience, I think, for me, because after that series, I got off all social media except for Instagram, because it just felt like on those other platforms I was too accessible. Whether people were talking about me or trying to directly talk to me, it just felt like I was just getting personally attacked for trying to do my job. So yeah, the decision there to sort of get off that social media platforms has helped me a lot since then. It took a long time to sort of figure that out, but it's helped me a lot.
It seems like it'd be hugely confronting to, like you mentioned a while ago, people coming up to you in the street and telling you when you've had a bad day. But then this is at another level where everybody has an opinion about you, about how you're doing it, about whether you're any good or whether you're not. And people who don't actually know you and don't actually know anything about you and have spent a total of 90 seconds thinking about it have suddenly come to their conclusions on it, right? How do you go about coping with that kind of situation where someone who didn't know who you were yesterday now has a firmly held opinion about multiple things about you, your life, how you do it, how you do your job, everything else about you?
I mean, I didn't deal with it well at all. Didn't know how to get away from it. I didn't know how to push those comments to the sides. It was always funny because in person, when you spoke to people, it was always like, oh, bad luck, rah, rah, and, I think you're batting well, or love what you're doing, all that. And then it just seemed like all the keyboard warriors would come out and, behind the keyboard were just ripping me to shreds. So that, at least that's what it felt like. And I think when you see those negative comments and when you read them, it affects you more than you think, and you need a lot of positive energy to come back in and sort of get on top of that. So all I tried to do was not read it. Tried to get away from it as much as possible. Any articles that I thought were going to be negative, I wouldn't read. If it was a positive article, I'd read it because I wanted some, like a nice little booster. That was at the time. And sort of now I've just gone completely away from it. So when things happen in cricket, or someone says something in cricket about me or about anyone for that matter, I don't really know what's going on. I'm trying not to read it unless it pops up on my Instagram feed for some reason. Then I'm probably not going to see it.
Yeah, I reckon there's a responsibility on print reporters on cricket to weight the opinions. By that I mean, not every opinion is equal. Quoting some people who have made a career out of being and made a professional career as commentators out of being headline grabbers. We should be more mindful of that and not quote them quite so readily. That's my view. Anyway, you kind of go into the wilderness at that point, which is so common, right? Aussie guys get a start, play for Australia, all that goes with that, get dropped, and then have that quite considerable dip. And you're part of the Sandpaper series for kind of in this really odd way, the guy on the walkie-talkie, right? And then you disappear from view at that juncture. I'm not saying the two things are related, but, maybe we'll go to that first. I mean, the idea that you were the guy on the walkie-talkie who apparently was orchestrating this cover-up with the coach. I know that didn't carry much weight and it didn't last long because the events surpassed it with the statements and the suspensions and all the rest of it. But being in the thick of the I mean, I don't think it's the exaggeration to say that was one of the biggest stories in world sport that year, and your face was there, however peripheral.
Yeah, it wasn't that wasn't great. Obviously, it was a tough time for Australian cricket, and the boys have atoned for that, and they've done their hard yards. But yeah, it's probably a great example of social media that it was cut perfectly, so it looked like, oh yeah, message, right, send Pete out onto the field. All right, talk to Bancroft, okay, and get off the field, like send the message out. And it was all cut up to make it look like it happened within minutes. But the actual fact is that was just like a big half an hour thing. And I only went onto field because someone needed to come off to go to the bathroom or to restrap or whatever. So it was just a freak thing that I was out there standing next to bangers. And we were just talking, like there was nothing, There was nothing else. But yeah, the images suggested a lot more. And it was a bit of a shame that that's where social media went with it.
And it's just to reiterate the first point of the question, that's the bit when you kind of disappear from view for pretty much a year, right? Between then and when you return to the one-day team and make that 100 in Mohali, which you might come to in a sec, like you're nowhere to be seen in the Langer regime, at least not initially. You play one test match against India at the end of the summer. Is it a couple of test matches against India? I got that right? You come back into the team.
Yeah, again, same thing. Sort of played two, I think.
In and out.
Got dropped, then got picked again, then got dropped.
Yeah, but you're still in that kind of in and out period where you're not established and you're not kind of front and centre of the Aussie plans, put it that way. And having to kind of go back to the Victorian dressing room and go back to the St Kilda dressing room, I suppose, where you've got to have to find a different way. That must come with an enormous amount of pressure on your shoulders, knowing that you've been there, you've done that, but and you've got so long to go in your career, but you're not there at that particular point.
Yeah, getting dropped sucks. It really does, because you're essentially losing your job, or it feels like you're losing your job, and you've done so much to try and get there. So, yeah, that was tough. After South Africa, and then that India series, I sort of played. My memory's terrible when it comes to cricket, but I feel like I played 2 tests, then got dropped, and then came back in for Sydney.
Yep.
And then got dropped for the Sri Lanka series after that, which would have been nice to stay on for.
Yeah.
But
a lot of guys filled their boots in those 2 weeks.
Well, it was a very different. It was a very different team to India. So it would have been nice to see if I was good enough to play against Sri Lanka at that time, because that would have been international. That's international cricket as well, and India were the best in the world. So I was like, okay, well, I'm trying to compete with them, but can I compete with the others that are also very good and the best and up there with the best in the world? So that would have been a nice challenge. But unfortunately, didn't get the nod in red ball, but then got to go back over to India and sort of have my last stint there as an international cricketer for a couple of years. And that was an incredible tour. I think we played. What did we do? We played 12 games, two T20s at the start against India. We win that T20 series, and I get to play T20 cricket for Australia. 5 one-days. We win that series, and then we go to UAE, win 5 one-days against Pakistan, and getting ready for the One Day World Cup.
And I mean, we've talked a lot about low points and glossed over some of the high points. I want to know about that feeling of those high points. I mean, the game at Mohali, like you're 2-0 down in that series, come back and win at Mohali. It's one of the most ridiculous run chases ever. You make 100, Ashton Turner does his thing. Or you could be talking about a couple of test hundreds that you've made for Australia as well. What is it like on the day, or say on the night of a match, where you've come back into the dressing room and you've done the thing that you've set out to do? You've made a test 100 for Australia, or you've made a match-winning 100 in that Mohali game. What does that feel like, if you can try to put it into words?
I'm not sure. Like it's such a tough thing to put into words. You strive for so long to be able to do something like this. You never quite know if you belong. You never quite know if you're good enough. and there were glimpses of it, and I felt I was good enough to play Test cricket, and I came in and I made some runs, and it kind of reaffirmed that okay, yeah, maybe I can do okay in this world, and potentially keep pushing. And then in one day cricket, I hadn't quite felt that yet. Even I'd had a couple of good scores, but I hadn't felt like I belonged. So that Mohali innings was special, and I feel like I didn't enjoy it enough for what it was, because I might never score another one day 100 for Australia, and I can't remember just sitting down for a minute after that game and being like, wow, this is cool. This is what I've always wanted to do, is make 100 for Australia and help win a game and actually contribute to being, one of the bigger factors in winning this game for Australia, and how years and years of hard work kind of get you to that moment. So yeah, I was a bit frustrated, I think, that I didn't enjoy it for what it was, and just potentially assumed that there would be another one, and that I'd be going on and making many more, and having that opportunity again, because unfortunately that wasn't the case, and I haven't really been able to play much one-day cricket from that moment.
I think one of Steve Waugh's books was called Never Satisfied, and that was kind of one of the themes that went through it, that in his life as a cricketer, there was always the next thing, which kind of spurred him on. But maybe at the time, what you're describing there is a factor for a lot of players at the top level. And then there's, I suppose, the lower moments, right, when you're not playing for Australia, or you walked out in that World Cup semi-final and it was just complete chaos at Edgbaston. I remember that morning, it just feeling like I've never felt a white ball game feel quite like that. England have the perfect day. You're on the receiving end of it. Australia are under the pump with all the earthing stuff, with Justin Langer walking around in bare feet. Everything that could have happened to Australia to go wrong at that juncture. A couple of injuries in the squad as well, which give you the opportunity. And then it's done, right? Like that little run of the one-day team ends at that point. I've asked this of other players before. Do you kind of go back and watch the Mohali innings or the 100 you made for Australia on like YouTube or whatever? Is there a temptation to go back and go, I want to feel that again secondhand by looking at the tape and proving it happened?
Yeah. I've watched that innings a fair few times now. More when I'm feeling like crap and I don't know where my next run's coming from, and sort of using that as a visualization key to be like, okay, so that's what it felt like. That's how I was moving. This is what, and that sort of kind of starts bringing back some memories. And it's like, all right, that was the feeling. This is what I was potentially thinking at that time, or what I wasn't thinking. And yeah, I think I've definitely used that as a way to try and get myself back. So yeah, I think every cricketer looks at their good stuff. Try not to watch your bad stuff, because it feels like crap.
There was this frustration as someone watching your career, like we said, that you were given a very short rope in terms of when you were dropped from the Test team, and then Mitch Marsh replaces you and makes 180 immediately, and then you were going so well in that one-day side, and it always seemed evident that you were in the Steve Smith spot. You were there at 4, basically. You were the rotate through the middle and start to up the tempo towards the end, and you were going so well. But we kind of knew that when Smith came back, he was likely to be able to pull rank and get that spot back, and you struggled to be able to hold on to it. Is a big part of succeeding being able to get past the feeling of being hard done by? Because it must take quite a long time when you do feel like you've done just about everything right and you still haven't been given very much leeway at all.
Yeah. I think cricket can be a very disappointing game. I think you fail a lot more than you succeed, unless you're the best in the world. But even then, it suggests that they still fail more than they succeed. So it is tough. And then, being able to move on feels like it's one of the bigger keys to being able to carry on and potentially succeed in your career. If you're hanging on to the past, then you're playing with a chip on your shoulder, and if you're feeling like you're hard done by, then things start to go against you anyway, because you kind of bring in that sort of negative energy into what you're doing, and you're always looking or potentially looking for an excuse rather than, you know what, all right, stuff it. This is one person's opinion. They think I shouldn't be in the team. That's okay. We'll move forward, and then, you know, hopefully someone else, their opinion changes, and all of a sudden you're back in the team. But if I can focus on my process, if I can focus on what I'm trying to do for the team, but then also, you know, the kind of person I'm trying to be, then hopefully all the cricket side of it takes care of itself, and you end up, you know, where you're striving to be.
Watching you really closely across your 2 seasons at Middlesex when it wasn't clicking, and, you know, again, everything seemed to go against you. There was that run out at Taunton. There was you batting under lights seemingly every time you walked out at Lords that season, where Middlesex just never got the rub of the green, and leaving a little bit early in your second year for family reasons, which were totally understandable at the time. But what came through loud and clear from your colleagues was how much they loved having you as the captain, and that experience you were able to bring from the Victorian dressing room, which was a fairly factionalised group when you first went into it, as all of your more senior teammates from that era talk about the literal punch-ons in the dressing room when they were very successful about 10 or 15 years ago. But you then go back to Victoria and you use Sheffield Shield as the platform to kind of go again. 2 fabulous years back to back, including last year with the unbeaten 281 at the Junction, and leading the nation for runs by the time you got picked for the Australian side again. That must be really rewarding that as leader, I mean, you've had the opportunity to lead a side to a trophy as well in one-day cricket, but as the leader, that you're able to lead from the front, make bulk runs, and effectively bang the door down. Because by the time you were picked for the India series, sure, there was a little bit of he's got experience in the subcontinent from 17, but more of it was, well, we can't knock-pick this guy because he's posted the numbers and having recovered from that slump a couple of years earlier.
Yeah. It was a nice feeling, sort of getting that run again. I'd put a lot of effort in there, put a lot of work. Chris Rogers and myself had spent a lot of time getting the technique, back to where it was a game that could potentially hold up again in different conditions. It was funny when you're searching for runs and you don't know where your next run comes from, you're trying to find it and you're not backing anything in, and you kind of forget your own simple game plan because it's not working at that time. And so Chris and I, we stripped it right back. We went back to the basics, where I want to score, and also just a couple of technical changes. And that took a lot of time to come back to feeling natural, because at the time I didn't realise how far I'd gone away from it. But, circumstances had suggested that I needed to change and needed to, bat differently, because I was getting found out a little bit. So that
must be hard, sort of, even just saying that, knowing that you're being found out, right? Like, it's a big professional concession as a batter to go that bowlers had got the better of me and they were working me over, and I knew I had to make a change.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like everyone, unless you're the best of the best in this game, I feel like everyone goes through those patches, that slump where the bowlers, for whatever reason, have that wood over you. And there was a period there where I felt like I wasn't going to score a run. Everything was really, really forced, and I had to try my hardest just to scrape a single when I was out in the middle, let alone hitting fluent boundaries and starting to build in innings that way. So to sort of have that time, and then to come out the other side of it for the moment, it's a really nice feeling, and it helps knowing that the work I'm doing seems to be the right direction. Doing a lot of work with a sports psych. Have also started doing some stuff with a clinical psych as well, with all these extra stresses of being a new dad, how that is affecting life and what that means for my cricket game. So doing all of that and seeing the rewards and seeing it sort of come out the other side for the moment is a really, really nice feeling, and probably something I can look back on. You know, if I do go through another slump at some stage, I can try and remember this feeling and what it was like, and hopefully, you know, keep building from that.
Have there been any light bulb moments talking to a psych? I mean, it's something that I think all of us in this conversation have done at different times and have found different parts useful. Is there anything in particular, or is it a gradual putting in place of good thought processes?
I wouldn't say there's like one thing that was said where I'm like, beauty, that's fixed it all.
Sorted.
Sweet as we never need to talk again. Like, we're sorted. Thanks for coming. No, it's very much just a constant conversation. That was sort of the last month or so. I've been having struggles again with my own personal expectations, and that expectation word coming back into it, and that sort of perceived pressure. So again, it's just another conversation, reiterating what we're doing and what that means and what you're thinking at the time, and then, you know, backing in your processes and making sure that everything's in place so that no matter what the result is, you've still done everything you could to be ready to go, and then the result takes care of itself either way.
And presumably that helps when things don't break your way, like the Ashes squad a couple of weeks ago when you weren't in the 17. They've named 4 openers and no middle order reserve bats. You were the incumbent in Ahmedabad a couple of months ago, so they've made a call on you in England for the time being. But I mean, I guess you're still here, which helps. But maintaining balance and calm at a decision not breaking your way that might have been more difficult earlier in your career.
Yeah, I think I would have dealt with it very differently had this happened in, when I was a lot younger. I don't think I had the mental strength to sort of go through coming in, doing pretty well in a test series, and then not even being in the squad for the next series. But I think something really needs to be said as well for George Bailey and Andrew McDonald and Tony Donamaid in terms of how they are the conversations that they're having, and I'm not leaving that phone call questioning, you know, why. At least I know the reasons, and they're very upfront, and even if you don't agree with what they're saying, you can understand where they're coming from, and that also makes it a lot easier to deal with not being selected. Like, it still sucks, and I still was angry, and I wanted to throw stuff against the wall, whatever, like go and vent some rage. But it was a very clearly communicated thing, and by all means the door's not closed. Like, had this happened when I was younger, I would have felt like, oh, that's international cricket done, and then you start spiraling. So at least the conversations are really good, and I feel like I'm in a better position to deal with that.
And the flip side of that is that in February this year, you walked out onto the field for Australia in a test match again. After all of the work that you talked about, the previous couple of domestic seasons and so on, that must have just been a tremendous feeling of satisfaction to say, you know, and not just for any series, like that's the hardest task that Australian cricket has. Going to play Test cricket in India is the thing that Australia almost always struggles to do. So they've gone for the toughest job available. We want you to be the one to do it. It must have been hugely satisfying.
Yeah. Very, very satisfying to be part of the squad again. Very satisfying to then get picked to be able to take on India in India on some of the craziest wickets we'd seen. But it felt a lot different to 2017. There was it felt calmer. It felt like, okay, yeah, these wickets are a bit crazy. Let's acknowledge that, but then also everyone stick to your game plan. Your game plan's good enough. That's why you're here. Like, trust that. And, you know, you all might be different, but let's trust that. And that feeling out there was really cool. And that also helps, you know, having been there before and sort of being back to be the guy that can sort of control the middle order. Yeah, it was a nice feeling.
And knowing how quickly it can turn, I guess, too, that maybe if we were having this conversation 18 months ago, you might have been the 15th person on the depth chart for Australia, because, you know, of the numbers and other players overtaking you, and getting back in the top six and playing Test cricket, doing well, especially knowing that this setback doesn't necessarily mean you won't finish as a satisfied Test cricketer. I mean, you played 20 times at Test level, knowing that there is the chance to add to that tally throughout the course of your early and mid-30s.
Yeah, exactly. I think I'm in a really lucky spot that I'm still only 32. So we're seeing people perform quite consistently later on in their careers. Obviously, Uzi's doing fantastic work at 36, 37, however old he is now. Chris Rogers was one that came back in. Matthew Wade was one that came back in.
Yep.
Mike Hussey started late. You know, there's so much to be said for still being able to contribute, even, you know, in your early to mid 30s in the Australian team. So there's still a lot of drive there, despite this setback. There's still a lot of drive to be able to play for Australia, to contribute to wins, and, you know, hopefully sing the team song again and have all that, you know, atmosphere around and get those pretty good feelings.
Maybe you can tell me. I was wondering in the lead up to this interview whether it's possible or when, I suppose, it's possible for a player to look at the career they've had and say, you know, I've played 20 Test matches for Australia. Most Australian cricketers don't get that far. You know, Damien Fleming played 20 Tests. Adam Voges played 20 Tests. Andy Bickle played 19. Like, players who we think of as having these really substantial careers or being substantial figures in Australian cricket, or, you know, even someone like George Bailey, who was a wonderful cricketer, played 5 Test matches. Andrew McDonald played 4. Like, there are these excellent top line cricketers who get very few opportunities. Is it possible to look at what you've had and think, like maybe for anybody, for any Test cricketer, their career is blink and they miss it. Like, it just goes by really quickly when you're experiencing it. I would imagine that, you know, I would guess there are probably 30 or 40 Australian Test cricketers ever who felt actually satisfied that they'd played as much as they wanted to play, and everybody else would be thinking, oh fuck, I could have played another 40 Test matches if they'd let me. You know, is it possible to look at it like that?
I think maybe it's just a different word. So I'm not sure anyone would ever be satisfied with the games that they played or the runs that they made. I think, or the wickets that they took. I think as a professional sportsman, you're sort of bred to do more and want more and always want to challenge yourself to be better. So yeah, I think you probably leave the game thinking, yeah, I could have scored a bit more. I could have played a few more tests. But I think something that's I've been able to change, and I'm seeing it in a few other players as well, is just the gratefulness of being able to play for Australia, and how lucky we are that this is our job. And I am grateful that I got another crack to play in India and to play for Australia and put that baggy green on, because there was a stage there where I thought that wasn't going to happen. And if it doesn't happen again, you know, that's okay. Doesn't mean I'm satisfied, but I'm still grateful for the career that I've had up to this moment. But obviously I'm still striving to do a lot more.
Yeah, so it may not be satisfaction, but what you certainly can be is very proud of the way that you've played the game so far, the way you've handled yourself. And we're grateful you've been willing to share that with us on your birthday. I wish we were more prepared and had have known that beforehand. But it's been great having you for this conversation on The Final Word. Appreciate your time and enjoy the rest of your birthday.
Cheers, guys. Loved it.